A wealthy businessman left his pregnant wife without hesitation, chasing wealth and desire. But years later, their paths crossed again under circumstances neither could have imagined. The soft amber light of the evening sun filled the elegant living room, shadows dancing across the polished marble floor and the pristine cream-colored furniture. Olivia Bennett stood by the large bay window, watching the bustling city below, its heartbeat steady and oblivious to her inner storm. Inside, her hand, still slightly trembling, rested on her belly. The same belly that, just this morning, had delivered the most shocking yet beautiful news of her life. She was pregnant. The thought brought a gentle smile to her lips as she traced slow circles over her abdomen, picturing the new life growing inside her. For months, she and Alexander Hayes had talked about building a family, and although his booming career often stole their time, she believed this moment would bring them back to the love that once felt unbreakable. Tonight, she planned to share the news over dinner. A home-cooked meal, something they hadn't enjoyed together in weeks because of his endless meetings and business trips. As she placed the last dish on the table, she heard the familiar jingle of Alexander's keys at the front door. The sound that once made her heart skip now filled her with uneasy anticipation. She smoothed down her blouse and took a deep breath to calm her racing thoughts. The door swung open, and Alexander Hayes strode in, leather briefcase over his shoulder, phone pressed to his ear. He wore a custom charcoal suit that fit his broad frame perfectly, radiating the confidence of a man who had built his empire from the ground up. His dark hair was slightly tousled, and the rich, warm scent of his cologne drifted through the hallway as he walked past her without even a glance. "Hold on," he murmured into the phone, covering the receiver with his hand for a brief second. "Olivia, I'll be quick. Just need to wrap this up." He kissed her cheek absently before disappearing into his office. Olivia's shoulders dropped, but she pushed aside the disappointment. It wasn't unusual for Alexander to be consumed by work. Tonight would be different, she told herself. Once he finished his call, they would have dinner, and she would finally tell him the news that could change everything. 15 minutes passed, then 30. When Alexander finally returned, he rolled up his sleeves and loosened his tie. Olivia forced a smile and motioned toward the dining table. "Dinner's ready," she said softly. Alexander glanced at the table and gave her a half-smile. "You didn't have to do all this." "I wanted to," she replied, sitting down across from him as they began to eat in near silence. The gentle clink of silverware against the porcelain plates was the only sound between them until Olivia cleared her throat, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Alexander, there's something I need to tell you." He looked up from his plate, a slight frown forming between his brows. "What is it?" Her heart pounded so loudly she could hear it in her ears, but she forced herself to hold his eyes. "I'm pregnant." The words seemed to echo in the room, lingering in the quiet like a distant bell toll. For a moment, everything froze. She had pictured this moment in countless ways. Alexander's face lighting up with excitement, him reaching for her hands, telling her how much he loved her and how ready he was for this next step. But none of that happened. Alexander set his fork down, his expression impossible to read. He leaned back in his chair, letting out a long breath through his nose, as if she had just told him about a minor inconvenience. "Pregnant," he repeated slowly, almost tasting the word. "When did you find out?" "This morning," she said, her voice trembling just a little. "I wanted to tell you right away, but you were busy." He finished her sentence for her, his eyes drifting past her toward the large window. He tapped his fingers against the armrest of his chair, the sound sharp and steady, cutting through her fragile calm. "Olivia, this is a lot." "I know," she said quickly, leaning forward, desperate to keep him close. "But we can do this. We've always talked about starting a family someday, and—" "Someday," he cut her off, his voice firmer now. "Not now." Her breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" Alexander sighed, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "Olivia, I'm right in the middle of the most critical phase of my career. The merger with Hamilton Industries is only weeks away from closing, and Clarissa and I—" Her stomach tightened painfully at the slip of another name on his lips. "Clarissa?" Alexander's jaw flexed as he realized what he'd revealed. "Yes, Clarissa's been helping me coordinate the logistics. Olivia leaned back slowly, the warmth she had felt moments before, replaced by a cold, sinking emptiness. So, what are you saying, Alexander? That this baby doesn't fit into your plans? He pinched the bridge of his nose, his tone growing sharper with frustration. I'm saying this couldn't have come at a worse time. I'm not ready to be a father, Olivia. She blinked quickly, fighting the tears that burned behind her eyes. But I'm ready. I want this baby. Alexander suddenly stood up, pushing his chair back hard enough that it scraped loudly against the floor. He began to pace the room, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. I need time to think. Olivia rose too, her voice breaking through the air, louder this time. Despite the knot in her throat, Olivia's voice rose, strained but clear. Time? Alexander, I've stood by you through every late night, every flight, every sacrifice you asked me to make. I've given you years of my life, and now, when I need you the most, you need time? He stopped pacing and turned to face her, his expression hardening like stone. I can't give you what you want right now, Olivia. I wish I could, but I can't. Her breathing turned shallow and uneven as the truth settled in her chest like a stone. He wasn't going to change his mind. She had always been the patient, loyal wife in the background, but with a child on the way, she couldn't afford to disappear anymore. Alexander grabbed his briefcase and walked toward the door, pausing only long enough to glance back at her. I'm flying to Zurich tomorrow. Clarissa and I have meetings booked for the next few days. Olivia's voice trembled as she choked out. So you're leaving me? He didn't answer. He just stepped out the door, leaving her standing alone in the room that now felt like an echo chamber. The weight of his absence pressed against her ribs, and the soft click of the door shutting sounded like the end of everything she had known. She wasn't ready to accept it. Her hand fell instinctively to her stomach as tears spilled freely down her cheeks. I'm not alone, she whispered to the tiny heartbeat growing inside her. We're going to be okay. But as the night crawled on and the silence pressed heavier than ever, Olivia knew deep down her world had just cracked open, and it was up to her to build something new from what was left behind. Before we go on, take a moment to reflect. If you were in Olivia's place, would you fight to save what's left or walk away like she did? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel to follow her journey. The rain tapped softly at the windows, its gentle rhythm the only sound filling the dim apartment. Olivia sat curled up on the couch, wrapped tightly in a blanket. Her hand rested protectively over the small swell of her belly. Alexander's departure, now 2 weeks behind her, still replayed over and over in her mind, like a broken record she couldn't switch off. His cold refusal to stand by her. His decision to fly off with Clarissa instead of holding her through this moment. It was a cruel reminder of just how replaceable she had become. She hadn't imagined loneliness could feel so sharp. The soft buzz of her phone caught her attention. Earlier, she had sent Alexander another message, clinging to the hope that this time, just maybe, he'd respond. Her fingers hovered over the screen as she unlocked it, but the empty inbox stared back at her, confirming what she feared most. He hadn't answered. Not this time. Not any time. Her grip tightened around the phone before she forced her hand to loosen. She wouldn't cry again. Not tonight. Pushing herself off the couch, she shuffled into the kitchen, the faint scent of lavender from the candles drifting through the room, but doing nothing to calm her restless thoughts. The calming scent lingered in the air, but even the soft fragrance couldn't quiet her restless mind. Olivia stared at the untouched plate of food on the counter, her appetite gone despite the dull ache of hunger curling in her stomach. The baby kicked lightly, a soft flutter that pulled a tired smile across her face through the fog of exhaustion. It's just you and me now, she whispered, resting her palm gently over her belly. We're going to be okay. For a moment, her eyes drifted to the far end of the kitchen. The same corner where Alexander used to lean while she cooked, teasing her about burning the pasta, then sneaking up behind her to wrap his arms around her waist and promise forever. The memory cut like glass now. She clenched her jaw, pushing it away before it could drag her under. A sudden knock at the door startled her. She wasn't expecting anyone, and the last thing she needed was another visitor with empty comforts and sympathetic eyes. But when she cracked open the door, her heart stuttered. "Michael," she breathed, staring at the tall figure standing in the doorway. His sandy brown hair was damp from the rain outside, and his warm brown eyes brimmed with concern and relief. "Olivia," he said softly, stepping inside without waiting for her permission. "I've been trying to call you." She blinked, confused. "You have?" Michael nodded, closing his umbrella and setting it aside. "I was worried when you didn't answer. I had to check on you." Olivia's shoulders drooped as the pressure inside her chest threatened to burst. Michael had been a trusted friend for years, always there even when Alexander's priorities shifted elsewhere. He had always been kind, steady, everything she realized she needed more than ever now. But even as she stood there, a sharp knot of fear tightened in her chest. What if she failed again? What if she couldn't balance being a mother and stepping back into a demanding career? The doubt whispered at the edges of her mind, cruel and relentless. "I'm fine," she lied, brushing the corner of her eye before any tears could betray her. "No, you're not," Michael said gently, stepping closer. "And that's okay." His simple words cracked through her fragile walls. Before she knew it, the tears she'd been fighting streamed down her face. Michael didn't speak. He didn't need to. He just pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her as she wept against his chest. "I don't know what to do," she whispered between quiet sobs. "Alexander's gone. He doesn't care." Michael's jaw tightened, but he didn't release her. "You don't need him, Olivia. You're stronger than you think." They stayed like that for a long moment, her sobs slowing until the soft drumming of rain was the only sound left in the room. When she finally pulled back, Michael handed her a tissue, his eyes steady on hers. "Come sit down," he said, guiding her back to the couch. From his bag, he pulled out a small stack of papers. "I know this might feel sudden, but I think this could help." Olivia frowned, pushing her hair behind her ear. "What is it?" "A job offer," Michael said, placing the papers in her hands. "It's with my firm. We're opening a new branch, and I need someone with your experience to help shape our strategy." Her heart pounded as she flipped through the first few pages. The position was demanding, ambitious, and exactly the kind of role she had once dreamed of, before Alexander's ambitions swallowed hers whole. For a second, a tiny spark she thought had died flickered to life. But along with it came that same flicker of fear. Would she disappoint everyone again if she couldn't handle it all? She swallowed it back, forcing herself to focus on Michael's words. "But I'm pregnant," she murmured, almost to remind herself of the obstacle. Michael smiled gently. "I know. We'll work around that. You don't have to decide now, but I want you to know you have choices." Olivia set the papers down, overwhelmed by the unexpected kindness. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you deserve more than to be forgotten," Michael said simply, "and because I believe in you." His words slipped into the deepest cracks Alexander's abandonment had left behind. For so long she had tried to be the perfect wife, the perfect partner, forgetting who she was without him. But here was someone reminding her she could be more than what she'd been left behind as. "Thank you," she whispered, wiping the last of her tears away. Michael nodded, his eyes lingering on her for a quiet moment before he stood. "I'll check on you later this week. Call me for anything, okay?" As the door clicked shut behind him, Olivia sat in the hush of her apartment, her thoughts racing. She hadn't expected this. She had braced herself to face her pregnancy and her loneliness, one painful step at a time. Michael's offer was a lifeline, a reminder she still had power over her own story. That night, as she lay in bed staring up at the ceiling, her phone buzzed again. Hope flared for just a second. Maybe Alexander had finally remembered her. Maybe he realized what he'd thrown away. But when she unlocked the screen, it was only a promotional message from a store she hadn't visited in months. The disappointment hit harder than she expected. She turned the phone face down on her nightstand, refusing to drown in false hope again. Her baby shifted softly inside her, the gentle movement a quiet promise that she truly wasn't alone. She rested her hand on her stomach and drew in a steady breath. Alexander had made his decision, and she couldn't change that, but she could decide what came next. She could rebuild. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the window, casting soft, warm patches of light across the room. Olivia sat at the kitchen table, Michael's documents spread out before her. She traced her fingertips over the pages, picturing the doors they could open for her. It wouldn't be easy. But nothing worth having ever was. A flicker of doubt tugged at the corner of her mind. Was she really ready to keep up in a world that had kept moving while she'd stood still, holding her marriage together? She shoved the thought aside, but it lingered like a whisper. With fresh resolve, she picked up her phone and dialed Michael's number. He answered on the second ring. "Olivia?" She exhaled slowly. "I'm ready to talk about the job." Michael's voice lifted, full of warmth. "That's great. I'll set up a meeting for tomorrow." When the call ended, Olivia looked out the window, the world appearing a little brighter than it had in weeks. She didn't know exactly where this path would lead, but for the first time in a long time, she felt something she had nearly forgotten. Hope. She didn't need Alexander's approval. She didn't need him at all. And as she braced herself for the changes ahead, she knew one thing for sure. Alexander had made a serious mistake. He had underestimated her. The soft morning light filtered through the curtains of Olivia's modest apartment as she stood before the mirror, smoothing down her blazer. It wasn't new, far from it, but it was one of the few pieces in her closet that made her feel like the woman she used to be. Strong, confident, capable. Yet beneath that layer of confidence, her heart knocked hard against her ribs. What if she had forgotten how to be that woman? What if the world expected more than she could give now? She took a deep breath, ran her fingers through her hair, grabbed her purse, and stepped out the door. Her first day at Michael's company wasn't just about proving herself to her new colleagues. It was about proving to herself that she could step forward without Alexander, without the crutch of being someone's wife. As she squeezed into the crowded subway, her mind drifted to the moment she had signed her employment contract just a week earlier. It had felt like jumping off a cliff and learning how to fly at the same time, shedding the version of herself Alexander had left behind and stepping into someone entirely new. When the subway screeched to a stop, Olivia adjusted her bag over her shoulder and walked the last few blocks to the sleek glass building that housed Michael's tech startup. Inside, the lobby buzzed with energy, young professionals darting back and forth with laptops and coffee cups, conversations swirling with ideas and ambition. Olivia's heart thudded, her steps faltering for just a second as a cruel thought shot through her. Am I too out of practice for this? She swallowed it down and forced her feet to keep moving, her chin lifting higher. She forced her steps to stay steady as she approached the reception desk. The receptionist, a bright-faced woman with vivid red hair and an easy smile, looked up and greeted her. "You must be Olivia Bennett. Welcome to Westbridge Solutions." Olivia nodded, her nerves settling slightly at the warmth in the woman's tone. "Thank you. Michael's expecting you. He said to bring you straight to the strategy room." Following her directions, Olivia stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the top floor. The ride was smooth but seemed to stretch forever, giving her time to think about just how much her life had shifted in only a few short weeks. Not long ago, her days had been consumed with hosting dinner parties, coordinating charity events, and making sure Alexander's suits were perfectly pressed. Now she was here, ready to dive back into market analysis, client engagement strategies, and ambitious growth plans. When the elevator doors finally slid open, Michael stood waiting just outside, a cup of coffee in his hand and his signature easy smile in place. "Morning, Olivia." "Morning," she said, taking the coffee gratefully. "Figured you might need this," he said as they walked toward the strategy room. She let out a small laugh, her hand drifting to the gentle swell of her belly. "I definitely do. He's been kicking more than ever." "That's a good sign," Michael said, holding the door open for her. Inside, the spacious conference room buzzed with quiet focus. Whiteboards lined the walls, covered in diagrams and sticky notes. The large table in the center was scattered with files, reports, and laptops, ready for the work ahead. Several team members were already seated around the table, their faces lighting up when Michael introduced her. "Everyone, this is Olivia," Michael said. "She's going to be leading our strategic initiatives for the new market expansion. Trust me, we're lucky to have her." The group exchanged warm greetings, and before she knew it, Olivia was absorbed in discussions about market trends, competitor insights, and the upcoming product launch. It felt like stepping back into a rhythm she'd missed more than she realized. Her ideas came effortlessly, and when one of the analysts asked about consumer behavior patterns, she didn't hesitate to dive in with a clear, detailed explanation, drawing from her years of experience. By the time the meeting ended, Olivia felt a satisfaction she hadn't tasted in years. But under that satisfaction, a quiet voice whispered she was still rusty, that any moment she might slip up and prove she wasn't as sharp as they all believed. She forced herself to push that thought down every time it surfaced. As the team packed up, Michael lingered behind, leaning against the edge of the table with a look of approval. "You were incredible in there." Olivia smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. It felt good to be back in this world. "You never really left it," Michael said, grinning. "You just needed the right moment to remind yourself." They spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing key accounts and outlining the next steps for the company's expansion. By the time Olivia finally stepped out into the crisp evening air, the city lights had started to glow, casting a warm shimmer over the sidewalks. She breathed deeply, savoring the cool air and the hum of pride that lingered in her chest. Still, as she walked, her mind replayed moments when she had stumbled over a word or when a question caught her off guard. A tiny knot of fear sat stubbornly behind her ribs. What if they realized she wasn't as ready as she pretended to be? She exhaled slowly, reminding herself she'd handled it all just fine, and tomorrow she'd do it again. Halfway home, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. She glanced at the screen and paused before answering. "Hi, Mom." "Olivia, sweetheart." Her mother's voice was a comforting warmth. "How was your first day?" Olivia's smile softened as she crossed the street. "It was good. Better than I thought it would be, actually." "I'm so proud of you," her mother said, her voice brimming with genuine pride. "I know this hasn't been easy, but you're handling it with so much strength." Olivia bit her lip, feeling tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "Thanks, Mom. I needed that today." After they hung up, Olivia slipped her keys into the door and stepped into the comforting familiarity of her apartment. She dropped her bag by the couch, kicked off her shoes, and headed to the kitchen to put together a quick dinner. As the scent of roasted vegetables filled the air, her mind replayed Michael's words from earlier in the day. "You never really left." Maybe he was right. Maybe the ambitious, capable woman she used to be had always been waiting just beneath the surface for the right moment to return. The next few weeks passed in a blur of meetings, presentations, and late-night brainstorming sessions. Olivia thrived under the pressure. Her mind felt sharper than it had in years, as she balanced the demands of her new role with her pregnancy. She began to rediscover parts of herself she thought she had buried long ago. The quick thinking that kept her colleagues sharp, the strategic insights others missed, and the quiet resilience that had carried her through life's hardest moments. But every so often, alone in her office late at night, that old voice would creep in again, whispering that one mistake could send it all crashing down. She shook it off each time. There was too much to do to let fear win. One evening, as she sat alone in the office putting the final touches on a report, Michael appeared in the doorway. "Burning the midnight oil, huh?" Olivia smiled and stretched her arms above her head, just finishing some projections for tomorrow's meeting. He stepped over and scanned the screen. "You've outdone yourself again. The board's going to love this." "I hope so," she said, closing the laptop with a quiet sense of pride. "I want this launch to be perfect." Michael paused for a moment before speaking. "I've been thinking about something, and I wanted to run it by you." Olivia tilted her head, curious. "What is it?" "We've been growing fast, and I can't think of anyone better to help steer that growth than you," Michael said. "I want you to consider stepping into the Chief Operating Officer role." Olivia's breath caught in her throat. "You've earned it," Michael added simply, "and I believe in you." The weight of his words settled over her, but this time it didn't feel heavy. It felt powerful. She had worked for this. She deserved this. Yet beneath the pride, a whisper of fear curled in her chest. What if I'm not ready? What if they find out I'm still doubting myself every night? She forced herself to stand taller and not let it show. "I'll think about it," she said, her voice steady. As she left the office that night, the city seemed sharper, the air cleaner, her heart lighter than it had felt in a long time. For the first time in forever, Olivia felt exactly where she was meant to be. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. And Alexander's absence no longer felt like a loss. It felt like freedom. The night sky over New York was a velvet stretch of dark scattered with flickering lights, but Alexander Hayes barely noticed as he leaned against the balcony railing of his penthouse. His mind raced with thoughts he couldn't silence, each one tightening the knot in his chest. The cool night breeze did nothing to calm the rising panic. Below, the city pulsed on, indifferent to the cracks forming in the empire he had built. Alexander clutched his whiskey glass tighter, swirling the amber liquid as if it might give him the answers he no longer had. The dim city glow reflected on its surface. No answers, only reminders of how quickly control could slip through his fingers. He took a long sip, feeling the burn slide down his throat, then turned back to the living room behind him. A room that once felt like a sanctuary, but now felt suffocating. Papers covered the coffee table. Financial statements, investor reports, pages and pages of red ink warnings he'd been trying to ignore for too long. His phone buzzed again on the couch, its vibration rattling his frayed nerves. He didn't need to look to know what the calls meant. More investors pulling out, more board members demanding explanations, more pressure he could no longer outrun. For years, Alexander had been the golden boy of the corporate world, aggressive, fearless, a risk-taker who turned deals into gold. But now those same bold strategies were tearing everything apart. The tech market was shifting. His acquisitions were draining cash faster than he could cover the losses. The sharp click of heels on marble pulled him out of his spiral. Clarissa stepped into the living room, her perfectly styled hair framing her composed face as she set a glass of red wine on the table. She looked as polished as ever, but the tension in her shoulders gave her away. "We need to talk," she said flatly. Alexander dragged a hand through his hair, his frustration close to boiling. "Let me guess. Another investor is nervous?" Clarissa crossed her arms, her gaze steady. "More than that. Hamilton Industries officially backed out today. They're worried about our liquidity." Alexander's jaw clenched tight. "We can come back from this. We've handled worse." Clarissa shook her head, her expression turning cold. "No, Alexander, not this time. We haven't been through this before, Alexander. This isn't just a bump in the road. It's a full-blown crisis, and you know it." Clarissa's voice cut sharply through the tense air as Alexander turned away, pacing the length of the room while his mind churned through desperate options. "We just need more time. I'm working on securing a bridge loan." "You've been saying that for weeks?" Clarissa interrupted, her voice rising. "The board is running out of patience. They don't trust you anymore." Alexander's hands balled into fists at his sides. He wasn't used to being questioned like this, least of all by the one person who had once been his most loyal supporter. "So what do you want me to do, Clarissa? Just roll over and let them strip me of everything I've built?" Clarissa hesitated, and the pause made his stomach twist uncomfortably. "Maybe it's time to think about selling off some of the assets," she said carefully. "We could still salvage what's left." "No," Alexander snapped, cutting her off. "I'm not selling." Her gaze softened slightly, but the pity in her eyes made his skin crawl. "Alexander, you're not thinking clearly. This isn't about pride anymore. It's about survival." "Don't lecture me about survival," he growled, tipping back the last of his whiskey and slamming the empty glass onto the table. "I've been surviving my entire damn life." Clarissa sighed and stepped closer, laying a gentle hand on his arm. "Then stop fighting everyone and start listening. You're not invincible." The truth of her words struck harder than he expected, settling over him like a heavy coat he couldn't shrug off. But he wasn't ready to surrender. Not yet. He pulled away from her touch, grabbed his phone, and ignored the flood of missed calls from the board. Instead, he dialed his lawyer. "I'll fix this," he muttered to himself as the line rang. "I always do." But when the call went to voicemail, a cold wave of doubt pressed against his ribs. For the first time in years, Alexander wasn't sure he could pull it off. The next morning, Alexander strode into company headquarters with his head held high, his tailored suit crisp and impeccable, a shield against the chaos beneath his skin. The building, once a gleaming symbol of his success, now felt like enemy territory. Employees greeted him with polite nods, but behind their eyes he saw it. The worry, the rumors, the fear spreading like a sickness through the halls. Inside the boardroom, the air felt heavier than usual. The long, polished table stretched in front of him, surrounded by executives who had once praised his every move. Now they watched him with cautious eyes, their loyalty hanging by a thread. "Let's get straight to it," one senior board member said, his voice cold and clipped. "We're hemorrhaging cash and the market's not responding to our restructuring." "What's your plan, Alexander?" Alexander squared his shoulders, forcing out the same confidence that had carried him this far. "We're negotiating a bridge loan from International Finance Corporation. They're interested, and I'm finalizing terms this week." "And if that falls through?" another board member pushed, her tone sharper. "It won't," Alexander said firmly, but even he could hear the crack in his voice. The board members exchanged quick, uneasy looks. Finally, the chairman leaned forward, folding his hands on the table. "We need more than promises, Alexander. The shareholders are restless. If we don't see concrete results soon, we'll have no choice but to consider other leadership options." His breath caught in his chest, but he didn't let it show. "I understand your concerns, but I built this company from nothing. No one cares about its success more than I do." "That may be true," the chairman said evenly, "but the company's future isn't about your personal history. It's about performance." The meeting adjourned moments later, leaving Alexander alone in the hushed boardroom, staring at the empty chairs that once held people who believed in him. His fingers drummed a restless rhythm against the polished table as the reality sank in. They didn't trust him anymore. His power, once unshakable, was slipping through his hands. He stepped outside, and the crisp bite of the autumn air hit him like a slap. He checked his phone, hoping for a scrap of good news, but instead found a single message from Clarissa. "We need to talk. Urgent." They met at an upscale cafe later that afternoon, the kind of quiet, polished spot they used to visit back when life was simpler and control felt effortless. Clarissa sat by the window, her eyes distant as she slowly sipped her coffee. When Alexander slid into the chair across from her, she didn't look up right away. "I spoke to the board," she said finally, setting her cup down gently. "They're weighing their options." Alexander's stomach nodded. "Which means what, Clarissa?" She sighed, the sound heavy with finality. "It means they've already begun discussions about replacing you." A dry, bitter laugh slipped from him. "I should have known. They'd turn on me the second things got hard." "It's not betrayal," she said quietly. "It's business." He leaned back in his chair, her words pressing down on him like an anchor. "And what about you, Clarissa? Are you turning on me too?" Her silence answered him before her eyes did. Alexander stared at her, a wave of anger, regret, and helpless betrayal crashing over him all at once. The empire he'd poured his life into was collapsing piece by piece, and now he could see so clearly. There was no one left to help him hold it together. As he stepped out of the cafe, his phone buzzed again. He glanced at the name on the screen and froze. Olivia. He hesitated before answering, the sound of her calm voice dragging buried memories up from the darkest corner of his mind. "Hello, Alexander," she said evenly. "We need to talk." Just like that, the past he thought he'd locked away was standing right in front of him, ready to deliver the blow that would change everything. The view from Olivia's office was spectacular. The city skyline stretching endlessly under the afternoon sun, golden rays flooding the towering buildings below. It was the kind of view that reminded her how far she'd climbed from the woman who once sat crying on her kitchen floor, to the leader now capable of making moves that could reshape entire markets. But today, the view was only a blur behind the storm of thoughts tearing through her mind. Olivia leaned back in her leather chair, her fingertips drumming quietly on the armrest as her eyes scanned the documents spread out before her. Front and center sat the proposal for the acquisition of Alexander Hay's crumbling company. The pages were packed with clear financial forecasts, market analysis, and strategic gains. Every figure backed up why this move was right for her company. And yet, it wasn't the numbers that made her pause. It was the name at the top of the report. Hayes Corporation. She'd known this day might come ever since Michael first floated the idea of expanding into vulnerable markets, but she hadn't expected fate to line up so perfectly, dropping Alexander's failing company into her hands just as it hovered on the edge of collapse. It felt almost poetic. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. Michael's name lit up the screen. She answered on the second ring. "Hi, Michael." "Hey," he said, his voice warm and steady, a grounding note in the chaos of her mind. "Did you get a chance to look over the acquisition plan?" "I did," she said, her eyes drifting back to the top of the report. "Everything looks solid." "Good. The board's ready to move forward. We just need your final sign-off." Olivia exhaled, leaning forward to rest her elbows on the desk. "It's not the numbers I'm worried about. You know that." There was a quiet pause on the other end before Michael spoke again, his tone softer now. "I know, but don't let your history with Alexander cloud your judgment. This is a business decision, and it's the right one." She knew Michael was right. Alexander's downfall wasn't something she had caused. It was the product of years of reckless deals and neglected responsibilities. But still, the thought of facing him again stirred something complicated in her chest. Would he think this was revenge? Would he believe she'd been waiting, hidden in the shadows, ready to pounce the second he stumbled? "I'm not doing this to humiliate him," Olivia said, more to herself than to Michael. "I know you're not," Michael reassured her. "And if it helps, you didn't put him here, Olivia. He did that all on his own." Olivia closed her eyes, letting the truth of that settle in her bones. For so long she had let Alexander's choices define how she saw herself. But they didn't anymore. His failures weren't hers to carry. Yet under the steadiness in her voice, a trace of guilt coiled deep in her stomach. Was she truly any better than him for taking advantage of this moment? She breathed through it, reminding herself that this was survival, not spite. "I'll sign off on it," she said at last, her voice steady. "Let's move forward." She could hear the relief in Michael's tone. "You're making the right call. I'll inform the legal team and schedule the meeting with Hayes Corporation to finalize everything." After hanging up, Olivia sat in the quiet of her office for a moment, staring out at the city skyline. She had built something remarkable. Something Alexander had once belittled her for even dreaming of. And now, she would prove just how wrong he had been. The following week, Olivia arrived at the high-rise that housed Hayes Corporation's headquarters. She wore a tailored navy suit that hugged her frame perfectly and radiated the confidence of a woman who had earned every inch of her place at that table. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floors as she made her way to the elevator, drawing curious glances she didn't bother to return. It hadn't been so long ago that she was the wife waiting in lobbies just like this, her thoughts dismissed as unimportant. Today, she wasn't here to wait on anyone. She was here to take control. When the elevator doors slid open, the receptionist at the front desk, a young woman with a nervous smile, gestured toward the glass-walled conference room. "They're expecting you, Miss Bennett." Olivia nodded politely and strode past rows of cubicles and hushed whispers. She could feel the eyes following her, the quiet buzz of speculation trailing behind her. The tension in the air only made her stand taller. This was her moment. Inside the conference room, the atmosphere was heavy, every eye shifting between her and the man at the head of the table. Alexander sat there, shoulders stiff under the weight of his unraveling empire. His expensive suit looked more like armor that no longer fit. When he looked up and saw her enter, his eyes flickered wide for just a moment before he caught himself, forcing a polite smile. "Olivia," he said, standing to greet her. "It's been a while." She met his gaze squarely, her own expression unreadable. "It has." They shook hands briefly, then took their seats on opposite sides of the long table. Lawyers and executives filled the room, but for a heartbeat, it felt like there was no one else there. Only the unfinished past hanging between them like a ghost. Alexander cleared his throat first, breaking the silence. "I'll admit, I didn't expect to see you leading this acquisition." Olivia's lips curled into a small, controlled smile. "A lot has changed since we last saw each other." He leaned back in his chair, studying her with a mix of curiosity and something else she couldn't quite name. "Regret, maybe." "So it has," he murmured. The legal teams launched into the formal discussion, outlining the terms of the acquisition and the transition plan for Hayes Corporation. Olivia listened carefully, adding clarifications or adjustments when needed, but all the while she felt Alexander's gaze on her, like he was trying to figure out how she'd climb so high without him ever seeing it coming. When the meeting finally adjourned and everyone else filed out, Alexander stayed behind. Olivia gathered her notes, fully aware he wanted a moment alone with her. "You've done well for yourself," he said, breaking the awkward silence first. Olivia looked up and met his eyes directly. "I have." Alexander ran a hand through his hair, the confidence in his expression softening into something rawer, more exposed. "I never wanted it to end like this." Her grip tightened around the edge of her notebook, but her voice stayed calm. "You made your choices, Alexander, and so did I." He nodded slowly, as if each word chipped away at the illusions he still clung to. "Do you ever think about what we had?" She stood, smoothing her blazer. "I used to, but not anymore." The finality in her voice left no space for what-ifs. As she turned for the door, his voice called out one last time. "Olivia, do you hate me?" She paused, hand resting on the doorframe. "No, Alexander, I don't hate you. I've moved on. You should try doing the same." With that, she walked out, her heels clicking confidently across the polished floor, leaving behind the man who had once dictated her entire world. Now, she was the one writing the next chapters, and this story was just beginning. The boardroom was an expanse of glass and brushed steel, its sleek, minimalist design radiating cold professionalism. The long conference table gleamed under the soft lights, and beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows the city sprawled endlessly, alive and restless. But inside these walls, the air was thick and suffocating. Every shuffled page, every quiet throat clear, sounded thunderous in the strained hush that settled around the table. Olivia sat near the center, spine straight, expression calm and unreadable. She'd chosen her outfit deliberately, an ivory blouse tucked into a tailored charcoal blazer and slim-cut trousers, polished and assertive without needing to say a word. Her hair was pulled back into a sleek ponytail, revealing sharp cheekbones and the steady focus in her eyes. Beside her, a leather briefcase held every document she might need, but everyone in the room knew her true strength today wasn't what she brought. It was who she was. This wasn't just another meeting. This was her reckoning. Alexander walked in a moment later. His eyes skimmed the table, taking in the gathered lawyers and executives, but they settled on Olivia quickly, and something flickered there. Recognition, maybe shock, perhaps regret. But he masked it almost instantly behind that polished, easy composure he had always worn so well. His tailored navy suit fit perfectly as usual, but something about him seemed off today. A slight slump in his shoulders, tension etched at the corners of his mouth. Small tells, but Olivia saw them all. She always had. He moved to the head of the table, shaking a few hands along the way before stopping in front of her. He hesitated just long enough for the silence to tighten. "Olivia," he said, forcing a cordial smile. She met his gaze evenly, her own smile small but unwavering. "Alexander." In that single word, decades of unspoken things pressed between them, but neither gave them breath. They both sat down. The legal teams began their introductions, outlining the agenda as contracts shuffled, pens clicked, and laptops flickered to life. But Olivia's mind wasn't on the documents in front of her. Her focus wasn't on the documents anymore. It was on the man sitting across from her. The man who had once brushed off her ambitions as nothing more than distractions from his own grand plans. Alexander had built an empire, and now it was falling apart. The irony didn't escape her for a second. The meeting dragged on, filled with dense talk about asset valuation, market positioning, and transition strategies. Olivia spoke with quiet authority, her voice steady as she laid out her company's vision for absorbing Hayes Corporation into their larger operations. Every time she spoke, Alexander's eyes darted to her, as if trying to decode the version of her he'd failed to see back then. When the meeting broke for a short recess, Alexander found her by the floor-to-ceiling window, where she stood taking in the endless sprawl of the city below. "It's strange, seeing you here," he said, his voice low enough to keep their exchange private. "In this role." Olivia turned to him, her expression calm but sharp. "Why is it strange, Alexander? Did you think I wasn't capable of this? He shifted his weight, running a hand through his hair, clearly uncomfortable. It's not that. I guess I never expected you'd be the one leading the company that's buying mine. Most people don't expect consequences, Olivia said evenly, her tone soft but direct, until they're forced to face them. Alexander winced, but caught himself quickly. I know things between us. They didn't end well. That's an understatement, she replied, crossing her arms. You left me when I needed you most, Alexander. And I'm not going to pretend that didn't happen just because we're sitting across a negotiation table now. He let out a heavy breath, leaning back against the window ledge. I made mistakes. Olivia raised an eyebrow. You did, but this isn't about your personal regrets anymore. It's about business. And right now, your business is failing. His jaw tightened at the blunt truth, but he didn't argue back. I didn't expect you'd come back into my life like this. I didn't plan it, she admitted, her voice steady. But here we are. For a moment, they stood in a silence broken only by the muted murmur of voices drifting from the hallway. Then Alexander spoke again, softer than before. Do you think we can come out of this as something other than enemies? Olivia tilted her head, weighing his words carefully. I don't see you as my enemy, Alexander, but I'm not the woman you left behind. I don't need you to validate who I am or what I've done. I see that now, he said quietly, eyes dropping to the floor for a heartbeat before he looked at her again. I was blind back then. She didn't deny it. Instead, she stepped closer, her tone firm but not unkind. This isn't about the past, it's about what happens next. You still have a chance to play a meaningful role here, if you choose to cooperate. But if you fight me on this, you'll lose. Alexander stared at her, and for the first time she saw it clearly. Raw vulnerability, maybe even fear, flickering behind his practiced calm. I don't want to lose everything, Olivia. Then don't, she said simply. Work with us, be the leader your people need while this transition happens. Show them you care about their future, even if it's no longer in your hands. Her words settled between them, heavy but threaded with an unexpected grace. She wasn't here to break him. Despite what he might have expected, she was giving him a chance to keep his dignity, to be part of the solution instead of the problem. Alexander nodded slowly, as if the weight of her offer was only now settling in. Okay, he said at last. I'll cooperate. Olivia gave him a small nod. Good, then let's finish this. The rest of the meeting moved forward without a hitch. Alexander added his input when needed, and the legal teams finalized every remaining detail with brisk efficiency. When the final contract was signed, Olivia stood, gathering her notes and sliding her laptop into her briefcase. The room emptied around them, but Alexander stayed where he was, watching her adjust the strap on her shoulder. Olivia, he said, his voice halting her just before she reached the door. She paused, one hand resting lightly on the knob. What is it, Alexander? He hesitated, eyes flicking away before finding hers again. I'm sorry, for everything. Her heart tightened, but she didn't let it reach her expression. I appreciate that, she said softly, but apologies won't rewrite the past. I know, he admitted, shoulders sagging a little. But I needed to say it. She studied him for a moment that seemed to stretch longer than it should have, then gave a single nod. Take care of yourself, Alexander. With that, she stepped out. The weight of old wounds lifted as she walked away, the cool breeze outside brushing against her skin like a quiet blessing. She had faced the man who once shattered her and walked away stronger, freer. This wasn't revenge, this was closure. And as she raised her eyes to the skyline towering above, Olivia knew her journey wasn't finished yet. There were still summits to conquer, still victories to claim, but for now, she was exactly where she was meant to be. Alexander Hayes sat alone in his office, the heavy oak door closed behind him, shutting out the quiet hum of what used to be his headquarters. Slanted beams of sunlight slipped through half-drawn blinds, splintering shadows across the floor. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping the side of the half-empty glass of scotch in his hand, staring at the acquisition documents scattered across his desk. The ink was barely dry, yet it already felt like a tombstone. A final mark for everything he'd spent his life building. Hayes Corporation, once a powerhouse in tech and finance, now belonged to Westbridge Solutions. Olivia's company, her empire. And now, his loss. He downed the rest of the scotch in one burning swallow, but the bitterness clinging to his chest had nothing to do with whiskey. It was the truth he couldn't shake. Olivia had seen his cracks long before he did. She hadn't waited to destroy him. She'd prepared to win. And she had. It hadn't been revenge. That was what burned the most. It was simply business. She'd beaten him fairly. A knock at the door snapped him out of the spiral. He let out a long breath, loosened his tie, and set the empty glass aside. "Come in." Clarissa stepped inside, her expression carefully composed as she closed the door behind her. Once, her presence had been his anchor, sharp, driven, always ready to scheme their next big play. Now, she was just another echo of what had slipped through his hands. "We need to talk," she said, her heels soft against the floor as she crossed to the chair opposite his desk and sat down. Alexander leaned forward, elbows resting heavily on the polished wood. "If this is about the transition plan, I already told everyone. I'll cooperate." Clarissa shook her head, her tone gentler than he expected. "It's not just that, it's about us." He blinked, thrown off balance. "What do you mean?" She exhaled slowly, her steady eyes missing the warmth they once held. "I think it's time we end this, Alexander." For a heartbeat, he couldn't process the words. "End this?" he repeated, leaning back in disbelief. "You're leaving me?" Clarissa folded her hands in her lap, her voice calm, decisive. "We both knew this wasn't forever. It worked while it worked, but things have changed. I need to think about my future." Alexander let out a short, bitter laugh, the sound empty, hollow, edged with disbelief. "So you're bailing now that things aren't perfect?" "It's not about perfection." Clarissa shot back, her tone sharpening like a blade. "It's about survival. And right now, Alexander, you're sinking." Her words hit him square in the gut, but he refused to show it. Instead, he forced a smirk, leaning forward over his desk. "Funny, you were more than happy to ride the wave when the profits were rolling in." Clarissa didn't flinch. "I was, but I'm not going down with you, Alexander." The silence that pressed in afterward felt suffocating. Alexander stared at her, every syllable sticking to him like wet cement. He'd convinced himself she would stand by him, at least long enough for him to claw his way back. But just like everything else, Clarissa was slipping through his fingers too. She rose, smoothing a wrinkle in her skirt with precise hands. "I'm sorry, Alexander. I truly am, but I have to look out for myself now." Before he could muster a response, she was gone. The door shut behind her with a soft click that felt far too final. Alexander sat frozen in the echo she left behind, mind reeling. Clarissa had been his partner, in the boardroom and in the quiet hours behind closed doors, the only one who'd known exactly how he thought and how he fought. And now, even she was done with him. He shoved his chair back, pacing the length of the office, rage coiling under his skin. His phone buzzed on the edge of the desk. He grabbed it without looking. "What?" he barked into the receiver. The voice that answered was calm, measured. "Mr. Hayes? This is David from Public Relations. I thought you should know. Olivia Bennett's acquisition of Hayes Corporation just went public. The press release hit the wires a few minutes ago, and the media's already all over it." Alexander's grip tightened around the phone. "And what are they saying?" David hesitated, which told Alexander more than words ever could. "It's not favorable, sir. Most outlets are spinning it as a fall from grace story. They're highlighting how you lost control of the company you built, and how Westbridge Solutions stepped in to save it." Alexander shut his eyes, breathing through the swell of anger and humiliation. "And Olivia? She's being framed as a brilliant strategist," David said, voice careful. "They're praising her for identifying the cracks in our structure and positioning herself perfectly for the takeover. The narrative is all about her foresight and bold moves." Of course they were. Olivia had played the game better than he ever thought she could. Now, the whole world knew it. He cut David off with a clipped thank you and ended the call, tossing the phone back onto his desk as if it had personally betrayed him. His temples throbbed. He poured himself another drink, amber liquid splashing as his hand trembled. He'd spent his whole career untouchable, always 10 steps ahead of everyone. And now, everyone knew he'd been outplayed by the woman he once dismissed as unimportant. Later that night, under the wash of city lights, Alexander sat in the back of a cab, heading somewhere he hadn't planned to go. Street lamps blurred by the window, flickering across the hard lines of his face. In the glass reflection, he barely recognized himself anymore. When the cab stopped outside Westbridge Solutions' gleaming headquarters, Alexander hesitated before stepping out. The building towered above him, its glass panels shining cold under the night sky. He pushed through the revolving doors, his footsteps echoing in the empty lobby as he approached the front desk. The receptionist looked up, startled to see him. "Mr. Hayes, I'm here to see Olivia," he said, voice rough. After a short call, she nodded toward the elevator. "She's expecting you." The ride up felt endless. The soft hum of the lift did nothing to calm the storm in his head. When the doors finally parted, he stepped into Olivia's office. She sat behind a sleek wooden desk, typing steadily on her laptop. She looked up when he entered, her face unreadable, her eyes steady as ever. "Alexander." He closed the door behind him, stepping closer to her desk. For a moment he didn't know what to say. "I saw the headlines," he said finally, voice cracking around the edges. Olivia nodded, folding her hands on the desk. "I expected you would." He let out a shaky breath, running a hand through his hair. "Is this how you pictured it ending?" She leaned back in her chair, her gaze locked on his. "I didn't picture this at all, Alexander. But this is where we are. I don't know how to move forward," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. Olivia studied him for a long moment before stepping out from behind her desk to stand directly in front of him. "Then figure it out, Alexander. You're not the only one who's ever had to start over." Her words were firm but not cruel. There was no venom in her tone, only truth. And for the first time Alexander truly saw it. Olivia wasn't here to ruin him. She had let go of the past, and now it was up to him to do the same. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice cracking under the weight of it all. Olivia nodded, her eyes softening just enough. "I know." As he left her office, the sting of failure clung to his shoulders heavier than ever before. But buried somewhere beneath the humiliation was a faint, unexpected spark, a chance to rebuild, to start again. If Olivia could rise from the ashes, maybe he could too. Olivia stood by the wide window of her corner office, staring out at the city skyline bathed in the gentle light of dawn. The glass panels caught the colors of the rising sun, splashing warm streaks of gold across her polished desk and the marble floor beneath her feet. Outside, the city, restless and never truly still, was only just waking up. But Olivia had been here for hours already, combing through reports and planning the next steps for Westbridge Solutions' expansion. Today was different, though. Today was the official start of the transition, the moment when Hayes Corporation would formally become part of her empire. It was the culmination of a journey that had tested every shred of her determination. The past few weeks had been a blur of legal battles, press releases, and late-night strategy sessions. But now, as she stood alone, with the quiet hush of morning wrapping around her, a deep sense of fulfillment settled in her chest. She hadn't done this out of spite or for revenge. She had done it because she'd earned it, every piece of it. A soft knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts. "Come in," she called, turning just as Michael stepped inside, a cup of coffee in each hand. "Figured you'd need this," he said, handing one over before leaning casually against her desk, his easy grin as warm as ever. "Big day." "The biggest yet," Olivia agreed, taking a slow sip of the coffee's rich warmth. "Thanks for coming in early," Michael shrugged. "Wouldn't miss watching history in the making." Olivia let out a quiet laugh, setting the cup back down. "You make it sound so dramatic." "It is dramatic," Michael said, his smile fading into something more sincere. "You took a company that was about to collapse and turned it around, and you did it while rewriting your own story. That's not something just anyone can do, Olivia." She smiled at him, but there was an honest humility behind her expression. "It wasn't just me. We've built an incredible team, and you've stood by me through all of it." Michael tilted his head, studying her face like he was reading a secret she didn't know she was sharing. "You know," he said, "a lot of people would have used this chance to crush Alexander completely, to make sure he'd never come back from it." Olivia's gaze drifted back to the window, her thoughts flickering to the night before, to Alexander standing in her office, stripped down to the raw truth of his failures. In that moment, he hadn't been the man she once knew. He'd been humbled. Yes. But there was also a flicker of something else. Maybe the first glimpse of real growth, Olivia said softly. I didn't need to destroy him, Michael. That's not who I am. Michael nodded, his respect for her clear in his eyes. And that's exactly why you'll keep winning. Later that morning, Olivia stepped into the main conference room where the final meeting to seal the transition was about to begin. Executives from both companies filled the space, their conversations humming with cautious optimism. She moved confidently through the clusters of handshakes and polite greetings before taking her seat at the head of the table. Alexander entered moments later. For the first time since their paths had crossed again, he looked composed. His suit was sharp, and though the faint shadows under his eyes betrayed sleepless nights, there was a calm steadiness about him now that hadn't been there before. Olivia, he said as he settled into the chair opposite her. Ready to finish this? She met his eyes with a small, unwavering nod. Let's get started. The meeting progressed smoothly. Legal teams presented the final agreements, and as each page was signed and initialed, Olivia felt something inside her settle. What had once been a wound in her life had now become a foundation for something greater. Proof that she could not only survive but transform pain into purpose. When the last signature was inked, the room filled with polite applause. Olivia rose, accepting quiet congratulations and handshakes from the gathered executives, but her mind was already moving forward. This wasn't an ending. It was the first step into an entirely new chapter, for her company and for herself. As the room slowly emptied, Alexander stayed behind, the air between them softer than it had been in a long time. No sharp edges, just a quiet understanding of how far they'd both come. I meant what I said last night, Alexander said, his voice lower, less guarded. I'm sorry. Olivia crossed her arms, studying him, weighing the truth in his eyes. I believe you. He seemed to breathe a little easier, but his next question carried the weight of honest fear. Do you think I have a chance to build something again? I do, Olivia said, without sugarcoating it. But it won't be easy. You'll have to be willing to change. Alexander nodded, as though he'd already accepted it. I'm willing. She extended her hand. He paused, then grasped it firmly, not in apology or reconciliation, but as two people who understood that their roads had split and would stay that way. They were both moving forward now, on their own terms. Good luck, Alexander, she said as she let go. Thank you, he replied, his voice carrying a sincerity she hadn't heard from him in years. Later that afternoon, Olivia left the office and made her way to her car, the crisp bite of autumn air brushing against her cheeks. She had a meeting with Michael lined up for later. But first, there was somewhere else she needed to be. She navigated the city streets, the hum of traffic and the blur of pedestrians fading as her mind settled on what waited ahead. When she pulled up outside the school, the final bell had just rung. Children spilled out in bursts of laughter and chatter, filling the afternoon air with life. Olivia spotted her son, a bright-eyed boy with a mop of curly brown hair, sprinting toward her, his grin wide enough to melt every bit of tension in her shoulders. Mommy, he called out, his little backpack bouncing behind him as he threw himself into her arms. Olivia knelt, wrapping him in a hug that chased away the last shadows of the day. Hey, sweetheart, how was school? Great. I drew a picture of us today, he said, breathless with excitement as he dug a wrinkled piece of paper from his bag. See, it's me, you, and Uncle Michael. Olivia laughed softly, her heart full as she studied the scribbled masterpiece. It's perfect. Hand in hand, they walked back to the car. With each step, Olivia felt a deep, grateful peace settle in her chest. She had fought so hard to stand here, and in the end, the truest measure of her success wasn't the business wins or the headlines. It was this, showing her son that resilience, hard work, and compassion could build a life worth living. Yet as she buckled him into his seat, a fleeting worry tugged at her. Will he hate me someday for how things turned out with his father? She pushed the thought away, brushing a gentle kiss to his forehead, promising herself she would give him twice the love to fill any empty spaces. As they drove home, the city faded into the rearview mirror. Olivia allowed herself a moment to breathe, to really feel the quiet triumph of it all. The woman who once sat alone, shattered by Alexander's betrayal, was gone. In her place stood someone who had built an empire and learned how to flourish, even when the odds weren't in her favor. And the best part? Her Her story was far from over. So that's where Olivia's journey brings us tonight, my dear friends. If you're still here with me at this hour, then something in her story must have found its way into your heart too. Maybe it reminded you that life does not always hand us fairness, but it does hand us the power to choose how we rise when it doesn't. Olivia's strength wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming her voice, piece by piece, until no shadow from the past could dim her light anymore. This reminds me of a line from Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic emperor. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Olivia's heartbreak was her obstacle, but also her way forward. Just like her, we all carry old wounds, betrayals, and regrets that threaten to define us. But if tonight's story teaches us anything, it's that we are not our failures, nor are we forever bound to those who let us down. As you close this chapter with me, ask yourself, what would your life look like if you let the pain push you toward your better self, instead of anchoring you in place? Maybe tonight is a quiet reminder that you too can start again, not because it's easy, but because you deserve a life built from your own courage, not your past mistakes. If Olivia's journey has touched you, please let me know by hitting that like button, sharing this story with someone who might need a little hope tonight, and subscribing so we can keep walking these paths together. From my heart to yours, thank you for staying until the very last word. Until our next story, remember, you are not alone and you are stronger than the world wants you to believe. Stay brave, stay kind, and keep going.